Is peace available in the midst of your chaos? It is. But it's not going to come from more support and relief exclusively. Support and relief is valuable, especially if you're under really significant duress. You need a harbor to catch your breath. I get that. But coming out of that harbor, as you are gaining agency and participating with the world that you're living in, unless you hide in that harbor indefinitely, which a lot of people do, they're never going to get access to these higher order ways of living that humans have always craved. If that's our ambition, and this is the world we live in, we don't have to bow to this kind of cynical, the best you can get is busy. The best you can get is hustle. The best you can get is kind of roll your eyes. The end of the story is life is hard. The end of the story is not life is hard. The beginning of the story is life is hard. As humans, we prefer the path of least resistance. We crave convenience, the payoff without the price. But when our lives revolve around comfort, it doesn't deliver. Living in perpetual comfort leaves us weak and asleep. This podcast is an invitation to flip that script, to choose the unlikely path, to get the life you really want through voluntary discomfort. This is Strong and Awake. I'm Dane Sanders.
If you find yourself stressed and feeling these emotions over and over, I think cutting back on my work hours will help, but then you continue to feel drained and overwhelmed. Or, I work so hard for my family, yet I feel like I don't have any time to spend with them. Or, I want to spend more time with them, but I need to keep working. If these dynamics are at play, and not just with your family, but just overall, you're feeling the stress in your life, then we want to interrupt that pattern, interrupt that loop, and go deeper, go kind of upstream. And that's what this episode is all about. This dynamic of desiring reduction of stress or work-life balance, these phrases that are thrown around all the time. So Dane, I would love to hear, you and I have talked before this call and even on past episodes about your disdain for even that phrase, work-life balance.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that and this dynamic that people are experiencing.
Yeah, well, I think it's really natural for people it's even culturally so acceptable. It's normative. People think that in the zeitgeist of life, what's normal is if I just had balance, then my life would be peaceful, serene, full of possibility, optimism. And there's something off, and I need to get it on. And I would argue I actually want to make a couple angles on this, take a couple angles. One angle on it is it's not honest. It's not really about I want balance. And I have said this before in past episodes, but just as a reminder, if I can solve your balance problem only by bringing you less stress, then it's not a balance issue. It's a relief issue. You want relief from your stress. That's a more honest statement. I'm overwhelmed and I'd like a break. Well, that's honest and it's understandable. And we're going to address that today. So if that's where you're at, that's where you're at. But the other part of it is it's a bit of a fantasy. I don't actually know very many people, unless they have 100% autonomy in their lives, are independently wealthy, have servants and machines doing everything for them at all times, they're plugged into something that somehow keeps their body from ever aching, or any kind, like the temperature of the room is just right, and I'm constantly feeling pleasure and never any pain. Like there's that fantasy doesn't exist. Now, that fantasy does fuel a whole industry of self-help, a whole industry of like, if I just had 8 minutes to get my abs, if I just bought this tool or device or program or whatever, then I would just get everything that I want. If I would just buy this device or see this service onto my life or whatever it is, that my life would just get better. It's understandable, but it's not helpful. There's a sense in which we're despairing, we're fantasizing about something that isn't available, but there is something available that we're going to talk about today that is very human. It's been practiced for thousands of years, and it actually helps everyday people like you and me get into a state that is more aligned with reality and gets us what we actually want. But this whole idea of if I just was less stressed, if I just had $10,000 more dollars, if I just fill in the blank, my life would get better. And notice almost all of those things are things outside of me. They're things that I need something to intervene into my life in order for me to get the life I really want. if you're in that state, today's conversation is for you. But don't miss the very commonplace kind of manifestations of what I'm describing. Whenever you find yourself saying, and people say it unconsciously all the time, I just need more balance. I just need more balance. And unconsciously, they're making agreement with this notion that there is such a thing as balance in the first place, and that somehow magically it's going to come into my life and make my life comfortable. And here's what we know for sure about the human condition. Comfort is an idol. Comfort is this dream. It's this Freudian, like, pleasure, no pain declaration that this is what humans were made for. And that's not what humans were made for. Because it violates the reality that we're navigating as humans. And it sets us on a path of perpetual discouragement, and entirely in an unnecessary way. Another way to think about it too is this whole notion that something is broken. Like, my whole world is broken, and if I just had balance in my life, then it would be unbroken. What if it actually isn't less about something's broken and more about you are participating in a system that's working perfectly and yielding the exact results that the system you're living in is designed to output? When you relate with your world as it's showing up to you in your life, the way you're currently relating with it, you're getting a bunch of experiences, feelings, thoughts that are coming from that feel broken, feel upsetting, but it's actually probably more resourceful to see it as the very natural outcomes of the system you're a part of. So if you don't like those outcomes, if you don't like those feelings and those thoughts that are coming from the world that you're navigating, what if you created a different system to yield a different set of outcomes? Because I think if you go approach it that way, not only will you feel a little bit more encouraged, like you're contributing to something, you'll have some agency, but you actually have a chance of tweaking what you're getting. And I think in many ways, the sentiment of if I just had more balance, I'd have a better life is really a reflection of people saying, I would actually like a different set of outcomes from the life I'm living into.
I like that distinction because it requires honesty, and it requires going further upstream. And like, I think what we're talking about here is this dynamic of like, how are you relating with stress? How are you relating with the things that you're up against or your reality? So I think rooting yourself in actual reality and then seeing that you actually have, it's actually freeing to see that you have that agency if you so choose to, like, do things about it versus being a victim to whatever might come your way or something that is external to yourself.
So, but so funny. I was in a conversation with a buddy of mine. He's kind of in his mid-20s. We were having coffee the other day, and he's a remarkable musician, very skilled in so many categories in his life. And it's interesting, as we were talking, he was asking for feedback. He was like, hey, tell me about, you're an old man, I'm a young man. What do you think of my life and how I'm navigating it? And I took a risk with him and just said to him, I think you're kind of clinging to an adolescent fantasy. Now, this is kind of a cruel thing to say, like a friend of mine to say such a thing.
But he invited it.
well, he not only invited it, it had a deep resonance for him. His response was like, yeah, life is hard. And all I thought was, this is such good news. This guy gets it. He's tuning into the reality that he's in the midst of, that life is hard. And to pretend that it isn't, that if I just could tweak some knobs and get balance, magical balance, I would no longer have to deal with adult living where it's difficult. That's just not how it works. Talk to anybody who goes through chemotherapy. Talk to anybody who's lost a parent or a child. Talk to anybody who's navigating war when they want peace. Talk to anybody whose partner says they're leaving. Talk to anybody who stubs their toe, gets an offender bender, gets bad news from the doctor, whatever it is. These dynamics at play, they are what we live in. That's the context we're in. So what would be smart is to take a nod from the Norwegians who say there is no bad weather, there's only bad clothes. Our job is to get ready for the world we actually live in and not pretend we live in a different kind of world. And that's what my friend was doing. He was pretending, because it is a different world when we're a kid and we have great parents, which this guy has or had or still has. They're just new relationship. But you get my point. As a young kid, he did have balance, but his parents were paying the price for him to have the life he was experiencing. And now appropriately, the parents are getting out of the way for him to grow up, for him to create lives for other people. And as he's coming into that, he's like, I don't like it. Ouch.
Mm-hmm.
And I can look at him square in the face and go, yeah, I get it, man. Me too. Me too. But if you ready yourself for the actual world we live in, you can actually enjoy, believe it or not, this difficult world that we live in. It's actually possible. Even those really harsh conditions I just referenced, all those examples I just like kind of went off on, even those, how much suffering they cause in your life. I know people who have navigated those things in such a way that they actually find joy in them, not in the thing, but in their relationship with the thing. It's their work with the thing, how they relate with the thing that determines it. And it is a miracle. It is unbelievable. But those are serious life living people who are flourishing even in the midst of difficulty. And on those rare occasions when we don't have those kinds of horrific challenges that we're up against, imagine what life could be like if you're getting after it when you're not under duress. Well, that's the dream. It's just incredible. We have just, like, I'm not anti-pleasure. I'm not anti-success. I'm just, let's get clear on the first step that we're in, which is the actual world we live in. When we're clear on that, we can ready ourselves to navigate whether it's stormy outside or whether the sun is metaphorically shining.
So along these lines of like the actual world that we're living in and the actual reality that we're participating in, we've talked a little bit about people saying they want balance, but they actually want relief. People participating in this kind of operating system and reaping those rewards. But what can we spend a little bit of time about, like, what people actually desire when they say these things, or when they're experiencing this stress, when they're feeling under it, when they're, experiencing all these symptoms? Like, what is it that they actually want, or we actually want?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reduction of toxic stress is a pretty natural thing to want. I think peace, fulfillment, connection with yourself and with others. You want to feel in control. You want to feel grounded. You want to feel aligned in your life with what you value. You want to feel integrated into the systems you're a part of, your work and your family. Like, these are good things. These are good things that people want. And even beyond just like survival mode, like, I have a roof over my head and I have food on the table. People actually have ambition beyond that. They want to not just have these kind of foundational relationships with self and others, but they actually want to go create things and do things and have a significant contribution to the world we live in, to love others, to give to others. And I think those are noble things, but they don't happen by default. Like, even as I'm kind of describing what I think people naturally are craving, some people might be listening to this and going like, oh my gosh, like, I do want those things, but that's too far out there. Like, I'm just trying to get through the end of the day. And I want to say that wherever you're at in the spectrum, ultimately where I think you want to get to, where humans want to get to, is this, again, alignment with who I am and who others are and how we're playing together and what we're creating together. I think people who are flourishing, those are the things that they want. And when I, use that old Norwegian proverb of, there is no bad weather, there's only bad clothes, you want to dress for the occasion. So if you want those things in the world we live in, that's where our methodology, I think, is resourceful. It's not the only methodology. There's a lot of folks who have thought about this over the millennia. But what we have found in our community is a whole bunch of people who keep practicing the same things, who are navigating exactly the world I'm describing and are finding their way forward to the very results they're craving, the real thing, not just some general vague sense of balance, relief, but really this moving towards these deeper desires of integrated existence. And I feel for folks who want those things and very naturally, and instead are taking different vehicles that aren't designed to get those things. They're just kind of flawed solutions, fool's gold. And I think like a classic example of that would be, okay, so I want peace in my life. So that means that whenever I'm under duress, under stress, what I should go do is go to the spa or have a cocktail or
self that tall glass of wine,
like some like numbing agent. And again, it's not a judgment. It's like self-medication, right? People are like, ouch, can I have an aspirin? I get it. And it's dealing with the short-term discomfort, but it's not dealing with the long-term ambition of what people are actually craving. Like it'll get you some relief, but it won't get you these deeper, real things that humans have always craved in order to flourish in life. And I think as we get more material and specific about what those things are, like we just started identifying, and I don't know that we've actually named it that explicitly on the show historically, but I think that's what we're suggesting is available to folks, that they actually could have that, like, is peace available in the midst of your chaos? It is. But it's not going to come from more support and relief exclusively. Support and relief is valuable, especially if you're under really significant duress, like you're getting pounded by life. You need some relief. You need a harbor to catch your breath. I get that. But coming out of that harbor, as you are gaining agency and participating with the world that you're living in, unless you hide in that harbor indefinitely, which a lot of people do, they're never going to get access to these higher order ways of living that humans have always craved.
Yeah. I think another thing, flawed solution or another harbor that people find is like, I'm just going to ignore the fact that these things are important. I'm just going to deprioritize these aspirations, or that this is even available to me because I don't want to face that reality, or I don't think that's available to me. So I'm just going to, like you said, stay in this harbor forever.
Yeah, this is the heart of Kierkegaard with his comment about man finds the level of despair he can tolerate and calls it happiness. It's just like, this is as good as it gets. And if I just settle here, I'll never get disappointed there. And again, I understand it's sobering. It's just haunting, actually. But I think anyone who's brave enough to look it square in the face, they go, well, that's not living. That's not living. There is another path. And I promise, friends, like I want to break through the microphone here and just like look people square in the face and communicate. We're not kidding. Like, this isn't a sales pitch per se. We happen to have a community that people pay for to participate in, but this is way bigger, way bigger. If you never participate with Men and Women of Discomfort, what we're describing is totally available. So we're not the only path to get the thing that we're describing, but we have a codified path that will get you what we're describing. and that's the part where it takes some degree of faith on the part of people who are under it in life to even have the chance to believe that something like this is possible. So I think you're right on the money, Mitch. I think it makes sense to me why people it feels better to settle, but it's not the only way.
Yeah. And really quick, I just want to, before we move on to kind of the next portion, I think the other extreme and the other side of that coin too is that people, like Brene Brown points out, like, wear stress and wear busyness as a badge of honor. They move the target instead of the life that I want. Like, actually, this is the life, and I should be celebrated. It's these people that every time you reach out to them, they're like, yeah, really busy, really stressed, like as this kind of cultural badge of honor.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us can find ourselves there too, without kind of going higher order, like we're talking about.
It's so encouraging, Mitch, even as you say that, like, what listeners don't hear on this show right now is the conversation we had before we started this episode, where we jump on, we're sorting through things. Dude, we have fires that we are putting out. You in your individual life, me in my individual life, even in our community as we're putting things on, things are breaking and new responsibilities are popping up that we didn't volunteer for, that we like. It's so tempting to say, I have to deal with this. And I think, to your point, it's really tempting to get, like, I don't know what quite the word is, but to put on that cultural uniform of, no, the goal is to be stressed and short and But I don't want to treat my friend Mitch like that when we jump on a call just because I'm stressed. And I know you don't want that either. And we actually aren't doing that. Like, instead, we go, okay, guess what we get to go do today? And if you haven't listened to the Get To episode, you should go back and listen to it. But man, oh man, it's that shift in perspective and and with a clear understanding of what is the world we live in, how can we relate with that world in such a way that we could actually get these higher order things that all humans have always craved for as long as humans have been humans. If that's our ambition, and this is the world we live in, we don't have to bow to this kind of cynical, the best you can get is busy. The best you can get is hustle. The best you can get is kind of roll your eyes. The end of the story is life is hard. The end of the story is not life is hard. The beginning of the story is life is hard. And despite life being hard, there's a path forward.
I think the natural next stage of this conversation that people might anticipate is, okay, now we're going to tell you how to calendar block. We're going to tell you how to meditate. We're going to tell you how to, download this app to help you be more productive so you can squeeze out a little bit more time in your day.
Yeah.
And while those things, I do those things, I'm sure you do. They're resourceful, but they are not the end all be all.
Well, they're tactics, and you're right. Like they can be totally useful in organizing. They're part of the system that we're living in, and you can tweak things in the system to get a different result. So yes, but keep going. I'm in agreement. It's not the full story.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people stop there, or they've got the perfect dialed in productivity system. They're doing, David Allen's GTD, or they've got this AI app or an assistant that's telling them exactly what to do when, and those things are all great. And yes, leverage those. But if we're still relating to the stresses of life, the challenges, the discomforts as a have to, like you were hinting at, or as these things that are things to be avoided at all costs and suppressed, then we're missing out on a lot of the growth that we have, the potential growth, but also like life as a whole. I mean, life is hard. It can be very challenging. And I think for me, what it comes down to is I don't want just to push all these things off. I don't want to ignore. I don't want to celebrate. I want resilience. I want to be the kind of person that can weather these storms, and not just weather, but like thrive in them still. Yeah. Well, so I'd love to. You have something to say.
Oh, I do, and it's
you're going to articulate it much better than I. So
I'm
not very curious to hear.
Better. It's just more. You're inspiring me, man. Like I've heard it said in other contexts, but in this context, it's novel for me. The idea that humans actually are not meant to be fleshy robots or machines. We're not meant to be machines. We're far closer to like an agricultural metaphor. Like we're less machine and more garden in reality in our human experience. So given the question you have is how would a tree stand in a storm? Especially if the tree is like a little tree or, whatever. And how can we, and what's unique in our situation as human beings is we're not a tree, we're humans, but we are like a tree, except for we have agency with it. So a tree, if it's planted in a thin kind of section of dirt, it's going to have tough to take roots. A tree that's kind of been under a lot of storms, is bent. That's where it is. It's going to navigate life from there. But as humans, it's interesting. We can actually uproot. We can actually go to a different context. We can put ourselves in a different place, but we're still organic matter. We're not machines. And I think a lot of the tactical solutions that are out there that you and I both employ regularly are more machiney than they are gardeny. And I think if we think of that metaphor just for a moment, it's a little, it's incomplete. I get that. But if you think about things like setting your roots, getting your nourishment, putting up a stake next to you so that you can stand straight if you need to for a season. And then in time, that stake is not relevant because you have fortitude in the trunk and it'll continue to grow. And it needs pruning constantly. And there's weeds everywhere around you. Like, even as I say these words, I know listeners are thinking like, oh, that's a weed. Oh, I need a stake right now. Because a stake is a request to get support for a season, which is very different than I need relief indefinitely. Big difference. You put a stake in so that you can actually grow strong on your own, distinct from the stake. It's seasonal. But if your whole life is around how do I go from stake to stake to stake, metaphorically, that's problematic. It's called a crutch. And you're not going to actually grow the way you're looking to grow. So I hope that metaphor is resourceful for folks. I know it is for me, because when I get too mechanistic in my relating with the hard parts of life, my experience is it gets kind of tinny. Like if all I'm doing is, to your point earlier, like I love time blocking, but my life wasn't meant to navigate a digital calendar and move things around and commit to times exclusively. Like there's a higher order thing here. Like I do that in order. That's a stake in the ground in order to stand up in life, to show up to my wife when things aren't going our way and be there for her. To when I get a discouraging email, the moment I wake up and I had great plans for my morning and I get to get after that fire drill. Well, those are the moments when I take advantage of the metaphorical stakes and do lean into the storm. In fact, when the storms come, I get to test to see if my stake was sufficient. I get to test to see if I had the nourishment I needed. I get to test to see if I'm well positioned for what I'm seeking to create. Does that translate? What are you hearing, Mitch?
It really does. I mean, I've always been a fan of like the agrarian metaphors for life, especially coming from kind of the educational background that I have. And one of the things that strikes me, and I'm sure I've shared this before, but I can't remember the name of the project, but it's that dome that tries to kind of like experiment whether we can grow food on Mars or on the moon or whatever. I think it's in Arizona somewhere. The story goes, at least as I recall, they had all these fruit-bearing trees and everything in there, but they kept falling over. They kept dying. They're like, what is going on? We're giving them the perfect conditions to grow.
Yes.
Yet what they didn't have in there was wind. There was no wind to stress these trees to prompt that root growth. So they were very shallow. They looked from the surface like they were flourishing.
Wow.
But the second like they got too big or something else happened, they would start toppling over and dying. And that's like, I think a lot of people can look from the outside and see, our community, MWOD, as like, you're just creating this greenhouse, and then the second people leave, they can't flourish. But I think what's distinct about kind of what we're doing, and like we said, it's not just available to those that are here. This is available to everyone. But we see the importance of that wind, of that voluntary discomfort. And that's kind of like what we're getting at. It's not, you can create the perfect, like try to shape your environment perfectly and like hope that nothing ever goes wrong so you can kind of follow through and flourish. But what we're advocating for is like, no, like choose the storms, choose the wind, and they will choose you too. And that will not just test you, but that will actually lead to the growth, lead to like the roots that you actually need to thrive and flourish. So yes, I totally resonate with the agricultural metaphors, and I think that's such a resource.
One more example that occurred to me as you were sharing and reflecting back. I was in another conversation with a dear friend who has kids, and this dear friend did not have an easy childhood himself, but was kind of a self-made guy and created some incredible wealth and incredible life for his wife and his kids. And he was lamenting, and he basically said, like, how do you create kids who are strong and resilient and able to move forward when they aren't up against involuntary discomforts? Because like the life this guy had when he was a kid was not something anyone would choose. It was hard, really hard. And yet it was actually those set of involuntary discomforts where he happened to stand up in the middle of it, where he created so much value. Then he has all this value and he goes, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a world that I didn't have growing up, which he gives to his kids. And it was a gift. I mean, I know these kids, they've had an amazing run, but he's concerned for them because he's like, do I have to like be a jerk? Do I have to withhold things from them? Do I have to recreate this awful experience for them the way I had it? I don't think that's quite the answer either. And there's something about the opportunity for those kids, the opportunity for the individuals to wake up, like my friend I had coffee with the other day, the first example, where they go, oh, I do have this fantasy wish that my life would just be comfortable my whole life. That's my dream. And if that's your dream, oh my gosh, if you get it, you're cursed. You're cursed. You actually won't get the very thing that you say you want. And it's tragic. It's understandable, but it's tragic. And you're being tempted in to a prison that kind of locks, even you could have pleasure your whole life. No bad news, and you'll be miserable. Oh gosh, that is like I want to vomit when I hear that out of my own mouth. And yet we don't want to prescribe cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're not talking about either. What we're talking about is like, what if you just built a handful of practices into your life where you chose the hard thing, like little things, little itsy bitsy things. Get into a cold shower, hold your breath, limit how much you eat or when you eat, work out every single day, drink water when you don't feel like it, connect with friends and tell them the truth about what's going on in your life, whether it's good or bad, whether you've done it right or wrong. Talk about what you're learning and how you want to correct course. Like those little discomforts, that's what we're talking about, to be very clear, are the means, they're the building blocks, they're the training ground, they're the clothes in the bad weather, so that when bad weather comes, you're able to navigate it. And more so, you're able to dance with it. You're able to go like, everything is training. Hard news, bad news, difficult challenges, it's training. It's not curse. You're turning the tables on bad news. And you're doing that simply by building, crafting, cobbling together a series of habits that yield resilience, strength, consciousness, the ability to have something to offer to someone else, to become strong and awake for love's sake. And I believe that as you get into this kind of a way of being, a whole universe of possibility opens up, a whole universe. And a whole universe of need, like where you start going, well, wait, I might need others to help me. It's a humbling experience, but it's a very satisfying one.
I think people, especially if they've been listening to this podcast and this series that we're in right now, can probably extrapolate some habits and some voluntary discomforts that they can incorporate into their life.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that there's, we necessarily need to spend a whole lot of time on that. But as we relate to these involuntary discomforts, like what are some ways and things that we can kind of do to kind of better relate to those or navigate those? Or if we're in this process of kind of shifting how we're relating with these things, like what are some of those first steps?
Yeah, I think that probably maybe the only step or the most important step is to make sure you're interpreting the data accurately. So, for example, we see this all the time when people commit to something, when they're thinking about it in theory. Like even right now, people might be listening to our conversation going, yep, that's the path for me. I want to do it. And you're going, I'm going to put myself on the hook. I'm going to get up and floss my teeth every day. Or I'm going to get up and, do some uncomfortable thing that I know that will make me better and prepare me for harder things. Good for you. Get after it. And then, well, at that moment, you think you've started. And in a sense, you have, right? You've committed. But it's not the beginning. The real beginning is you come up against it and you actually don't want to floss your teeth. You don't want to go to the gym. You don't want to go for a run because it's kind of overcast today. And I like it better when it's sunny out when I go running or whatever your thing is, right? And in that moment, if you choose to do it, you've actually created the real starting line. So it feels like commitment was the start. Well, I guess it got you had set an intention, but until you don't want to do it and you do it anyways, you release on your preference and you go after it, it hasn't started. But if it does, it has started, friends. It has, even if you're white knuckling it, even if you're like begrudgingly, you have a frown on your face while you're doing it, at least you're doing it. And I think that you'll discover that in just a little while of just doing it anyways, you might just find yourself in a place where you're like kind of looking forward to it. Because there's something on the other side of those difficult tasks that feel very gratifying. You flossed your teeth, you go, I'm a flosser. You get into that cold shower, and you come out and you go, I can get into cold showers. You have coffee without creamer, you actually are just fine. Everything's okay, except for you have 240 less calories of junk in your body. And now you're moving toward the thing that you say you want. And I think that, we talk about all the time at MWOD, we call it credo, right? Committing to something, releasing on our preference, and then eventually embracing the hard thing, hugging the cactus, and then expanding our view, defining how this could play out in a broader spectrum of our life, and then we own it with our behavior. And that pattern of commit, release, embrace, define, and own, that can be replicable over and over and over again. And ultimately, we start seeing ourselves very differently than we used to see ourselves. One of my dear friends, Brady Schmidt, who won't mind that I said his full name, he and I have been friends for 35 years, went to college together, and after years of making fun of me about men and women of discomfort, finally jumped into the fray last quarter and saw it all the way through. Lost 29 pounds. He didn't just lose some weight. He's changed his perspective radically. And he's not done. He's like, I want to continue to get after it. But it's funny how the familiarity of me and it, like for years, just kind of put it off. And now it's so fun to see Brady because he actually sees himself different. His identity has transformed. And I think that's back to the original thing that we started talking about. You don't settle anymore. Brady's seen some traction and he's raised his horizon, his viewpoint. He goes, well, if that was possible, well, what else could be possible? And how can I methodically, one day at a time, continue to walk towards that reality? And Brady is emblematic of hundreds of people who've done the same process that Mitch, you and I are in every single day, where we really have an operating system for how we navigate the challenges of life. And then the notion of balance, all of a sudden, it just, if you look at it for a second, you go, well, that just seems like a really small solution to a big problem. Like a trinket, a tchotchke, like it's a nothing. It's not enough for the human experience. And I think this approach, this more, in a sense, serious, even though we take ourselves not so seriously in the middle of it, it's actually an amazing way to live. That doesn't just get the results, it actually changes who we are as people.
I think that's one of the things that we forget too when we look at maybe guides or others that have seemed to have arrived or at least are further along the path than us.
Mm-hmm.
I think like, how would that be possible? But one of the things that Brady pointed out as he was reflecting on this last quarter and many others is, one of the exercises we do at the end is like, put on the weight that you've lost and walk a mile. And he's reflecting like, how did I carry this around? And others, that have lost 40, 50 pounds. And again, it's not all about weight, but like that metaphorical and very real burden. They're like, how did I carry this around for so long and just settle for this? What we don't realize at the beginning of this process, when we're just starting, is that like what is available to us isn't just like, how do I deal with the immediate stresses right now better? But through that becoming, through that like actually transforming who we are, not just physically, but we're better equipped, we're better integrated, we're more resilient. That will allow us to navigate even bigger storms that we're now in the future because we will be more resilient. We will be transformed and better equipped. And I think that's what we often forget, that it starts here.
Yeah. I'm so excited for next time's conversation too, as we move from the balance conversation to mental health and think through the practical implications of what we've talked about today on things like mental health. And it's interesting to me when I think about going through my own, 20s and 30s and 40s, there was an openness to things like, oh, let's go to counseling or therapy. Like it was almost taboo to actually have mental health issues. And I grew up in the generation where it became more acceptable. But now it's full on like just accepted, like to the point where it feels normative. Like everyone has to feel anxiety. Everyone has to be ADD. Everyone has to be, whatever. And I'm not trying to take away from like being diagnosed in a certain kind of way and however you're navigating it. All I'm saying is it's at an epidemic level. Like I'm trying to think of anyone I know who doesn't describe serious bouts of anxiety, depression, discouragement. And it's not universal, but it feels like there's, especially with younger generations, like this is just, gosh, what I'm navigating and how can I get mental health? And even there, and we'll pick this up next time, but even there, the default position is how do I get more support? How do I get more kind of soft pillows around me in my life in order to navigate these hard mental states? And I'm so excited to get into that conversation because I think what we have to offer could actually give more, not only the relief that you're actually looking for, but so much more of a sense of finding your way forward where you're not in a perpetual victim state to your mental health. So, but that's next day. for today, Mitch, what do you think folks should do as an application to what we talked about today? What one thing could they go do to find their way forward a little bit?
Besides signing up and applying to M1? Or does that count?
Well, they hear us pitch that a lot. So yeah, go to MWOD.io/apply. Join us in the pursuit, friends, if you want that. But let's say they don't. Let's say they don't apply, but they want to do something. They're open to what we're describing, but they want to test it on their own terms for a minute. How would you, you're having coffee with a friend and they're asking for your advice. What would you suggest?
I would say think of something that is moving in the direction of what you want, or maybe even something adjacent that is hard. Something small. I mean, like we use the cold showers or flossing example. Like, do that. A lot of people talk about floss one tooth. And then as you start to get that habit, as you start to get those muscles, you'll inevitably start flossing and become a flosser. So I'd say hop in that cold shower, floss your teeth. Don't eat until noon. Just do one small thing and see what becomes available to you. And it might not be instant, but get those reps in. Yeah,
I think this is where James Clear is so resourceful in his Atomic Habits and everything that he's written about and said is the idea of like, to get a little traction on the front end, discipline or habits that are good for you or habits that are bad for you that you want to remove, make it easy for you on the front end to keep your commitment to yourself, something small. And I think that like even something as simple as like interrupt the system that you're in. If your pantry is full of crap right now, as soon as you hit pause in this podcast, go get a garbage bag. Consider everything you're about to throw away as a sunk cost. Don't give it away to others. It's just poison, but just throw it out. Just throw it out. You're not going to miss it. And I suggest to you that those little things, whether it's the removal of things or the adding of things, you're moving in the right direction. And as you stay in this conversation, I think you're going to start to enjoy the real thing you're seeking in a way that will be incredibly gratifying.
100%. And again, it's probably not for you, but just in case it is, and you want to explore what we're about and the methodology that we've got here, just go to MWOD.io/apply. Next round is probably kicked off by the time you're listening to this, but just jump in there, apply. We'll be in touch. We start
every quarter.
Yep.
And the next quarter is coming quick. Men and Women of Discomfort is our membership community, and we are open to everyone. But keep in mind, our tagline is, it's probably not for you. If we're wrong about that, or if you want to find out for yourself, you can find us at MWOD.io.